Postures. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, nice. All right. So, thank you very much for everyone for coming today. It's a sunny day outside, and I'm glad to see all of you here today. So, we start a new month. This is the first month of the first Sunday of the month, and as usual, we have our lunch and learn. We're gonna talk a little bit more about the lunch at the end, but let's not take away time from the lecture. And today the theme of the month is Luiz. So during the entire month we're going to talk about Luiz and the different books that Fru Chico Xavier he brought to us, and as a way to learn more about the eternal life, right? So Marco will be the lecturer today. But before we start that, I'll invite Paul to do the reading and our initial prayer. All right?
Have you thought about this? Because I know that I will soon put my tabernacle aside, as the Lord Jesus Christ has made clear to me. 2 Peter 1:14. If on many occasions great Christian voices have referred to supposed crimes of the flesh, it is necessary then to mention the weaknesses of the self and the inferiority of our spirit. So we must not falsely accuse the body as if it were playing the part of an insatiable executioner separated from the soul, who would then be seen as his prisoner and victim. We notice that Peter considered the physical body to be his tabernacle. The human body is a conjunction of agglutinated cells or earthly fluids that are united under the planetary laws, offering the spirit the saintly opportunity to learn, to value, to reform, and aggrandize life. Man frequently, as an idle and perverse laborer, attributes the evil qualities that are assaulting him to this useful instrument. The body is a concession of the divine mercy, so that the soul may receive preparation for the advent of a glorious future. Rather than casting accusations at the body, let us reflect upon the millenniums spent in the formation of this sacred tabernacle in the field of evolution. Have you come to realize that you are an immortal spirit taking advantage during a specific time here on earth of valuable potentials conceded to you by God in order to fulfill your work requirements? Such forces have formed your body. What are you doing with your feet, your hands, your eyes, and your brain? Do you know that these powers were confided in you in order that you may honor the Lord through your own enlightenment? Meditate on these questions and then sanctify your body, thus finding within it a divine temple. God our Father, Jesus our guide, all the good spirits who join with us each Sunday morning at this time, let us one more time take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to live and to learn and to hear truths that mankind has waited millennium to hear, that are now given to us so freely and easily, that we may leave here today growing and benefiting and learning from the great message that is about to come. In Jesus' name.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, that was a nice good morning. Okay, so filling with our hearts with the nice sunshine and the warm temperatures outside. I hope we can keep this all in here, although it's a little bit cooler in here. But let the warmth of our hearts fill this space with love and good energy, so we can have a good morning today. And I'm the only thing between you and a nice lunch and conversation that we're gonna have afterwards. So I'll try to behave well and be quick as possible. I know Marcia's laughing at me already, but you'll see. I'll surprise you today. Okay, so. today we're going to talk about Andrea Luiz. So it's always an amazing opportunity for us to go through so many different topics in regarding to Spiritism and life in general. Because Andrea Luiz, as the title here is suggesting to you, he's not only someone that's like a beautiful enlightened spirit that decided to write things about life in the other planet or, you know, in the other world or the spiritual world. No, he's like a typical working class incarnated spirit on earth. He was a doctor, lived in the early 1900s, hard-working professional. He had his own duties, his own mistakes, you know, things that he did were positive, things that were not so positive. But he's your typical guy. So, and he's very clear about it. The very first thing he writes on the spiritual, the sequence of books from Nosso Lar, in Nosso Lar, he would say, you know, I was this guy that was I was blinded by my selfishness, my arrogance, and my pride. I thought I was doing a great job till I came here. So I was a doctor, successful one, had a lot of, you know, I was working fine, but I've imprisoned my family within the realm of my own success. So he would treat his family like didn't even have time for them or anything. And I would treat other people differently because I thought I was special, because I was this nice, well-known doctor, you know. But he starts to realize, hey, wait a minute. I thought I was doing a very good job. Hey, I'm not. And he quickly realizes that. So by that period in time that he starts to rethink who he is, that's when he starts to write to us and say, guys, wake up. You know, I'm here. I'm a friend. You know, I know what you guys are going through. I've been there. And I'm here, and I can help you. And that's the setup that we're going to talk about today, which is the sequence of books starting from Nosso Lar, the 13 books from that spiritual collection, basically. So life in the spiritual world, that's called the collection. But not only that, he will also take that opportunity of sending us enough information that he was allowed to, that would help us build on the next step in our own spiritual development and Spiritism collectively, all of us together. So he would be a teacher of basic concepts sometimes that were very hard to explain before him. Now, you can imagine this is set up in 1944 when he started writing Nosso Lar through Chico Xavier. He writes things about cars that fly, buses that hover around, and some type of spiritual nourishment that you can actually breathe your elements of life through your nose and you don't have to eat. Hey, I don't get that. Still, we don't get that either. Like, we're still learning that. But that was so shocking to that period of time that most people would say, forget about this guy. This is a joke. Andrea Luiz is just making this up. Chico Xavier has no idea what he's writing about. And people within Spiritism said no to his books. Yeah, a lot of people say, no, I don't believe this. So he wrote things like, for example, the first description of an iPad, which is very well described in, I'm trying to remember which book now. I think it's Missionaries of the Light. I can't remember precisely. But he's in a spiritual meeting, and he describes this apparatus that he can see, like a handheld device, that he could see the images that were happening in the family of that person being helped during the meeting. So through this handheld screen device that would project images on his hand. It sounds to me very much like an iPad. And other things that we're still kind of gathering, like, hey, what is this? We're going to talk about medicine. We'll talk about, how the hormones in our bodies interact with the spiritual world. He talks all about that. But before getting to that point, he actually to get rid of his old self, like literally cleansing himself of this massive amount of pride and selfishness that he built on during this previous experiences on earth. And that's what we're going to briefly go through today. We don't have time to go through details of every single book, but we're going to have the whole month to talk about this. And we're going to have Joyce is going to give us a lecture about Between Heaven and Earth. And then Tiago is going to talk about And Life Goes On. And, we have several opportunities to go over each one of his books, which I list here. So this is basically, this is like early 1944. And then we start with this nice collection of books called Life in the Spiritual World that starts with Nosolar and ends in 1968, as you can see there. Yeah, so, and there are more books though. There are many more books. They're not really part of this sequence of books, I would say. And we're going to talk about them too in a lot of detail, but not today. We're just going to briefly talk about them today. So as you can see here, so we're talking between 1944, which are just two books basically, just one in the beginning, one at the end of the year, and then 45, 6, 7, 8, 9. So basically between 44 and 50, we're talking about 6 different books that were released through the mediumship of Chico Xavier by the Spirit André Luiz. So, and if you have a chance to read those books, you'll see there's so much to learn from them that likely the amount of information contained in the 6 books in 6 years basically was so enormous that's why there was so much resistance to it when it came to light. And even today, there's a lot of people that still do not understand a lot of the concepts that are contained in these books. But this is really not new. Let's talk about the Bible. So we have it around for about 2,000 years, the New Testament, right? The Gospels. How many of us really understand what they're saying? So they're still new to us. So to humanity in general, we take a long time to accept new concepts, understand them, and put into practice, which is like another very long story because we still don't have them in practice yet, right? So we're still working on that. And this is another layer of information that came in the same way. And then later that from 54 to about 64, there's another sequence of about 6 books that came through. And let's talk about them. And there are other books, as you can see here, for example, Christian Agenda and other ones. And we're not even considered the ones that are co-authorships. For example, there's a list of books that he co-authored with Emmanuel, which were, also not exactly part of the same collection, but very important books that André Luiz gave to us through his work. So let me ask you this then. So how many books from André Luiz you guys read? Let's say you read one book. One. Just say 1, 2. Okay, 2. 5. Okay, we have 2 here. 10. There you go, have 3. Between 5 and 10? Between 5 and 10. Okay, now let me ask you this. How many of you read 10 of his books or more and remember most of it? Okay. Okay, another question. Who of you read 10 or more and still have to read like another 10 times because there's... Yeah. So this is the thing about André Luiz, and that's a huge issue for many of us, that we read it once and we think, hey, I got all this nice, I know a lot about it, and then you read it again and I'm like, gee, this is a different book, right? I've never heard this before, and then you read it the third time, I'm like, oh no, like I thought I knew this. No, you don't. No, it's amazing, and you can I can guarantee you can read it like 5 times, and by the 5th time you read it, you're still gonna say, "Oh, this is an amazing. I have to work on this because I'm missing this." And he's very straightforward. He'll point a finger at you and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I've done, and this is bad." And then you look at yourself like, "Gee, that hurts," because that's exactly what I'm doing probably. And I still haven't. I read you 5 times, André Luiz. I know, but I didn't do it yet, right? So it's an interesting way of approaching this, because I read all books from this Life and Spiritual World collection, but I can guarantee you that I need to read it another 20 times for me to really say, okay, maybe I'm getting a little bit of it. Because even if you understand it, there's another huge barrier, which means putting in practice, right? So there's like a combination of things that we normally stop in this huge barrier. that we may understand things, but hey, we don't do anything about it, and that's not helpful. Okay, so let's see what we're going to talk about today. Nos Solar. So I'll just briefly go through the books, and of course we don't have time to go through every detail of them, but I'll highlight some of the things that I think are most important features about each one of those books. So Nos Solar is the most shocking book in the whole collection, not because it brings a lot of really new things, but because it's the first one, and we're living in world era, like the World War II era, like the world's chaotic. Spiritism is starting to pick up in most places, like in Brazil, for example. And then we're really talking about a city in the spiritual world. So that concept of having a city in the spiritual world, which is type of which actually our society kind of reflects upon, and really is kind of getting towards that setup they have there. It's kind of shocking in the beginning, because believe me, we've been here in this world for many, many times, and we've been taught since day one we were here, probably there is another world. It's like a spiritual world or heaven, or you can call it different names, and where angels fly. We're just like this green fields, and we have fun all day, and we sleep and we get bored, I guess. But that's what we were taught, right? And we're there, and it's all beautiful and light, and no. So Andrea Luiz says, hey, wait a minute. You come here, you have to wipe the floor, you have to work hard, because you have to make your hour bonus, because otherwise you can't do anything, right? So you need to show that you're doing something. That is such a transformational concept, because it brings back to us the responsibility about what we do. So I go to the spiritual world, get to work. You're going to work way more than you work here. That's what Andrea Luiz is telling us. And he's very clear. He's like, I'm a doctor. Hey, I'm a doctor. So I want to work as a doctor. The guy's like, sure, you want to work as a doctor? Yeah. So the first thing you do, you see all the spirits that are suffering here, you clean their rooms. That's a starting job. And of course, his pride, hey, I'm trying to tell you that I'm a very good doctor. And it's like, yeah, I got that. So why don't you talk to people and help them? See how that is so huge, because that really touches into what we do today. And that's what Andrea Luiz was doing. He was working hard, like most of us do, and we're professional, very successful and all that. But what else are we doing? It's like, is that our goal in life only? Is that it? Like, make money and have a nice profession? That's what Andrea Luiz was thinking. And when he got that, he learned that the biggest thing he could do in life was actually to help another person through your profession. That it doesn't matter how you do it, but that's the core of our existences, charity. And he was missing that. So there you go, Andrea Luiz starting wiping the floors and all that, and but then he goes to this point where he's starting to realize who he really is. And that's another big shocking book. Because all that myth that he created around himself, and we don't have that, right? Like we know who we are, we know that we know our mistakes 100%, we work on them every day, right? Okay. So Andrea Luiz realized that everything he thought about his life is actually not necessarily true. He was a very different person inside. And he breached through this layer that we create. We don't create that, right? No. So we do that. We do that to live in society. Everyone here in this room creates, presents himself or believes in a shell of existence that is a little bit different from what we are deep in our cores, because that's how we live in society in a way that we can interact with each other. For example, I have my own mistakes, but I don't keep telling them to everyone, right? So I just, I present myself as like this guy that smiles and does everything cool, but I have a lot of issues inside of me. Everyone does, right? But in here, they can't see through you. So other spirits will look exactly where your problem is inside you in your spiritual body. you can't hide it anymore. So Andrea Luiz had a lot of trouble with that. But he could not just say, hey, I'm a nice guy, I'm a doctor. Everyone could see inside him and say, oh, I don't think so. I think you should know yourself better. Know yourself. We heard that before, I guess, right? Okay, so interesting topics. So we have the description of a spiritual city and the unconscious suicide, which is the case of Andrea Luiz. See, these are concepts that were completely unknown to us, right? Unconscious suicide. So we believe suicide is when you actively take your life and that's it, discarnate, right? But what about you live a life of vices that will shorten your experience? Are you committing suicide? Yes. So Andrea Luiz, that's exactly what he shows in the book. By his vices, his addictions, the lifestyle he had, not caring about his health and doing all sorts of things, he shortens his experience dramatically. And that, by definition, he explains, it's called unconscious suicide. Because you are killing yourself. You're not aware of that consciously, but you are taking away from you some time of your experience in here, incarnated, that could have been very useful to you. So these are the very novel and interesting concepts that we started in this book. And the hour bonuses, and we know that you have to work to get them. They don't come, from somewhere. And very nice, they talk about work in the spiritual life, music, how they have their social life too, and we have all those things. So Andrea Luiz really puts himself just like any one of us, as I said in the beginning, and he works very hard to transform what he calls the old man, which is what he used to be in. And I'm not going to tell you the end of the book. Most of you have seen the movie, I guess, or have heard about it. But in the end, he had this trial. He wanted to come to Earth to his family every day in Solar, basically. It's like, I don't know why I'm being held here. And that's pretty much what we do every day. We complain. And the spirits were telling them, hey, wait a minute, you're not ready yet. And yes, they were very correct, because when he goes back, he sees his family, the new state of his family in his existence, and he could not bear that. That was so shocking to him. See that his wife had remarried, had another person in a home, and his kids were so different, his house was so different, and he had to help her new husband. That's his trial. He had to get rid of all that selfishness and that arrogance, that pride, and say, to make my wife happy, I have to help this man. And I won't tell you what happened after that, but that's just to show you how difficult it is sometimes to really look inside of us and see, how would I behave in a situation like this? And stop judging, because we tend to judge a lot. I don't know if you notice that, right? I do. So, and that's something we do all the time, and we don't realize it, how difficult it is, because we don't know anything about each other's life here. We think we know, but we actually don't, because we don't know a lot either, because we mask it, we make it disappear so we can cope with life, right? So, it's a very difficult scenario, and Andrea Luiz puts himself in exactly that spot. And we kind of know from his mind what exactly he's going through in his mind. So it's an amazing book, by the way. So it continues in the book called The Messengers. So he's now a transformed man. So he can see his mistakes, he's working on them. And now we're talking about mediumship here, big time. So they talk about the mediums that are studying and working very hard in what it looks like a school or university in the spiritual world, that they go to train to be mediums. So they come here and they can exchange and communicate between the two worlds. And the vast majority of them in the meeting have failed. They couldn't do it. And then Andrea Luiz is shocked to learn that. So we learn about mediumship, how is the preparation in the other side, so we can come here and do what we're supposed to do, either through mediumship or through any type of work. So it's an interesting view of that. There's like rescue outposts around the earth. So he talks about there's the spiritual cities, and there's little outposts that are located at different parts around the surface of the globe, where they rescue spirits that are discarnated, they're in despair, they're in trouble, so they're all helped in these outposts and then prepared to either reincarnate again or to go to a spiritual city to learn more and prepare themselves more. And Andrea Luiz joins a group that's going to help come to the surface now to work with us and help other incarnate spirits. So it talks about the story of each one of the individuals that were helped, and each one of those stories are just amazing. We learn a lot from them, so I highly recommend reading that. And he comes to, for example, a gospel at home, and he describes how reading the gospel at home is important from a spiritual point of view, because we can't see it. And his description of the amount of good energies and how many good spirits come and help us when we're doing the gospel at home is so amazing that I can guarantee if you read that, you rethink again every time you pray at home, and you say how beautiful and nice it is for you, for your place, and for everyone that you're thinking about at that time. And there's a description of the discarnation process, basically, and how it happens. So again, it's a very interesting book, and I will certainly highly recommend that. So the major message here of the messengers is the importance of working your own inner transformation to work as a medium or to succeed in your incarnation on earth. What you prepared yourself to is, basically. Right? And the third book of the series, now, I call that a technical description of mediumship part 1. Because you see, Andrea Luiz, he's starting to learn a few things. So you can actually tell that if you read those books in a sequence, you can tell that very clearly. He's changing. Even the way he writes, the technical terms he learns, but he does not put that information to you as like, oh yeah, I'm this, well-known scientist that I'll tell you this. No, he actually shows to you that high level of information through his own mistakes and questions, which he sometimes says, I'm not going to ask this question. Maybe I should ask this question. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question to my master, for example, Claudencio. And then Claudencio answers him. And through that answer, he's actually answering to us. So this is how Andrea Luiz put things in a way that he doesn't create a barrier between the learner, the beginner, and himself. We're all kind of the same level, and he's very good at doing that. And that's why Hidden Read's books is actually so nice, because you can actually easily say, hey, I had that question too. Oh, that's nice. It's not that he's saying, oh, you got to do this. No, he's like, let's learn from this experience. That's his approach on his books, and I really enjoy that. And this book is Alexandre, his mentor, invites him to a journey to Earth to work with mediumship. So he's going to be working in mediumistic groups, and he's going to be working on these obsession meetings. So this is start to be a little bit more technical than normal earthly life, basically. And that's why I call it a technical description of mediumship part 1. If you want to learn about mediumship through the eyes of the spiritual world, this is a starting point, I would say, right? And he brings now very complex ideas that were not present in the first 2 books. For example, how the pineal gland is really the gland that's bridging through the connection of the spiritual world with your physical body, and how does the connection for the hormones in the whole body are totally interconnected with the energy centers of your perispiritual body. So they're connected. So in every major major gland on the endocrine system, there is an energy center corresponding in the perispiritual body. And through the way he explains, and of course backed up by many other sources of information, is that the energy that you reflect and you receive from the spiritual world exerts a direct effect on the endocrine system to the specific glands that the energy center is connected to. And the major one, which is the coronal center, starts from the pineal gland, basically. That's the center of it. You have to read it. It takes about 30 pages in the book to describe it. So, I'm just giving you like a tiny, tiny hint of it. But he also brings a lot of scary things. People were scared when this came along. Because, for example, the term vampirism. Have you heard about vampires? We all did, right? So we talk about Dracula and stuff. No, that's not what we're talking about. It's not Dracula or anything. But vampirism as a mechanism where one individual, either a spiritual in the spiritual world or incarnated, can take advantage and live on the resources from another individual. One example. So let's say you drink a lot of alcohol, and you're sitting there drinking your own alcohol, and you think it's okay. You're alone, yes, you think, right? But you think you're alone. But André Luiz describes now that in the spiritual world, there are a number of spirits that used to drink alcohol just like you. We're not talking about like a glass of wine after dinner. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about real alcohol, like drinking a lot. So, and what happens then, like all the spirits that used to do that, they tag along your feeling of the alcohol drinking, and they can nourish themselves on you when you're doing that. So that's vampirism. So they really hold on to you, connect to your feeling of, I would say like you're in, satisfaction. I would say from taking that sip, and they will tag along that. They will also feel satisfied. But when they do that, of course, they're also taking away a lot of your nice energies, and they're of course exerting more influence to you to drink more and more because they need more. And he describes a scene in a bar that there's a gentleman that's completely alcoholized, like he's completely drunk, right? And all the spirits around him totally vampirizing on that feeling, making him drink more and more and more and more non-stop. So that's relating to the addictions, right? So that's a totally new concept that was brought by André Luiz at that time. And obsession, abortion, and indirect abortion. It's a novel concept. There's so many novel. We could be hours and hours talking about this. So he talks about, again, we think about just like the suicide, for example, that we thought, no, suicide is just going to take my mind. Now he's like, abortion is not actually, it's not only when you actually say, okay, I'm going to abort this kid and I'm taking it away. No, but if you collectively do things that will increase the chances of your pregnancy to fail, so that is in the spectrum of indirect abortion. And he describes the case that this pregnant lady, that she needed a specific set of precautions in her pregnancy. She had to avoid the partying and alcohol and drugs and things like this. But she disregarded all those warnings and continued with her lifestyle, and she lost a baby. So that was an abortion. And that mother will face the consequences spiritually for her actions. Now, we're not here to judge what happened, really, but we're really to understand that for everything we do, there's an action and a reaction associated with that. So whatever we do that's obviously not right in our understanding today, we'll really face the consequences of that, right? So, and there's like description of reincarnation now. We had the description of discarnation in the previous book. Now, basically, this is a more complex description of the interaction between the spiritual world and the physical world, right? And I would recommend actually reading if you haven't started yet. I would recommend going through the sequence. It's actually the best way for you to absorb the information. Because if you jump into this one, because it's a nice title, Missionaries of the Light, it's actually very complex. And if you don't know anything about this Spiritism, it's going to be very difficult for you. You're probably going to stop by the middle and say, okay, I can't take this anymore. Like, it's too much. That's exactly what people did in 45. Right? They said it's too much for me. Okay. Then next one is Workers of the Life Eternal, and now André Luiz is trained. Yeah, he finally got it, and he's so excited about it. So he's not a student anymore. Well, he is a student, but he's a student with privileges because we're all students. But he now can go on his own and actually work not in training mode. He's actually doing something really himself, and he's working with the mentor Geronimo in this book. And there's so many interesting things. So basically, this book it's based on 5 stories. They're interconnected. 5 different individuals in the book, and they're gonna go in and help each one of them. And in the end, you'll figure out that they're actually interconnected somehow. But it varies between topics like euthanasia, discarnation, like death, coping with death, obsession. So each case is a specific story, and they're going to go and help each one of them. So it's very interesting because, again, gives us a very realistic perspective on things. These are real stories, right? And another interesting point that was brought here is called the transitory house, which is it's not a spiritual city. It's like they call it house, but it's actually a very large complex that helps spirits that are very close to the surface of Earth, that are discarnated and they're still going through a lot of trouble, and they're welcomed in this transitory place before they can learn enough or be prepared enough to continue their journey in the spiritual world. So it's really like an emergency room, right? Which is very interesting. In the greater world is more about psychiatric disorders. And again, as I said, if you go in the sequence, it's better because this is very dense psychological essay about spirituality. It is very difficult. And it is going to bring you how, and those are amazing questions. For example, how psychosis and madness, epilepsy, behavior disorders are explained from the spiritual perspective. These are really amazing stories in this book. A little bit more challenging to follow and difficult sometimes, really, than the previous ones. But it is really a psychological essay from the spiritual perspective. And if you're in that field, I think it's like a must read for you. There are cases of homicide, addictions of all sorts, and spiritual influences in places like bars. It goes to that again. Pubs, discos, party places, actually they describe the view, the scene from the spiritual world. You may be shocked to hear what happens in those places. I'm not judging or anything, but you'll be shocked. I can guarantee you that. So now in greater world, André Luiz, he's not only a messenger and a student, he starts to be the teacher. He starts to be someone that he can now, because of what he's been through, say, listen, this is what I've done, and this is, I think, you should be aware of, right? And he talks about giving us a glimpse of the relationship between the physical body and the spiritual body, and what our actions really are doing in the overall scheme of things. This one has just been translated, I think, about a year ago. It was only available in Portuguese, Libertação. Now I think it's Liberation, the English name. I think this is one of the most touching books from André Luiz, by far. Again, increasing levels of complexity, as I've been trying to explain to you. Like, this is a very complex view on obsession. So this is really about obsession, this book. But again, he does it by bringing real-life stories of obsession and looking from them from the spiritual world and learning from each one of those cases. And in the end, he starts with one story, and he helps a whole group of people, including a whole spiritual city devoted for obsession, which is managed by Gregorio, which is the spirit that, which is a very unhappy spirit, as you'll see in the book, who commands this group of obsessor spirits that attack specific places on Earth, basically. So André Luiz starts with one case, and he's like just peeling this nice piece of paper from that case. All of a sudden, he opens up this whole book, which ends up by himself helping Gregorio, which is the leader of all these obsessor spirits. Now, why is it touching? Because he really points to us exactly why this is happening. It's Gregorio. So here's the problem. When you think obsession, we automatically think that the spirit that's the obsessor is bad. That's almost all of us. Like, really, we have to think and say, no, that's not true, actually. But he shows to us very clearly that they're really living in a state of suffering and ignorance so ginormous that they cannot leave anything outside of that. They cannot see it yet. They cannot see the light yet. Instead of pushing them away, which was our instinctive reflection to it, to say, oh, there's an obsessor spirit here, get off. That's what we're trying, like, get out of here, I don't want you here. And André Luiz is like, come, I'll help you. That's what he does. And he shows to us that the leader of this massive organization of obsessors, which we in the starting the book, we're like, oh, I hate this guy, you know. We end up saying, poor little kid, you know. He suffered for like 10,000 years. And he was doing all that just because he didn't know anything away from that. Actually, we started thinking that whoever's suffering is the spirit incarnated. No. In the end of the book, we realized that actually the real sufferer in this story is the leader of the obsessors. Amazing story. I hope you can see that too. You know, it is an amazing story. An eye-opener, because this book completely changed my view of Spiritism. Completely. Because I still had this binning category type of approach, like, oh, there's good spirits and bad spirits. Do not believe that, please. Wipe that off your minds. That does not exist. What exists is the spirit that's now able to comprehend what is goodness, and the spirit that's yet to do it. And actually the ones that need the most are the ones in this bin. It's actually the ones that still cannot understand what's being good and what's being helpful and what's charity. That's what we have to work on. And probably ourselves. I'm there for sure. I'm a little bit to that bin. Not a little bit, maybe a little bit more. And so it's a very interesting story. So between heaven and earth, so Joyce is going to talk about this book in she's there. No. Okay. So Joyce is going to talk about it in the third weekend of September. That's interesting because up to this point it was increasing complexity, as I told you. But this book goes back to the basics. So this book goes back to family ties and basic concepts. So if you want to start reading by this one, you can. That's a very easy read, I would say. Just like Nosolar, very similar. Beautiful story, beautiful book. Talk about family ties and how family ties are so connected to our spiritual families, and how can we learn from our experience within a family nucleus, basically. How like the family is really like the school, and this book is very good about that, and it's a beautiful story. So I'll definitely recommend that. Talks about discarnation of kids and what happens in the spiritual world when kids discarnate, and talks about suicide and the consequences of it. Talks about difficulties within families, why there's so many people in families that hate each other, which if you don't believe in reincarnation, you have trouble figuring out why that happens. Certainly science cannot explain it, because you're brought in the same center with similar attention, with the same house, and you have two diametrically opposed personalities, for example, right? So this book is really about that. Explains that to us in an easy way. Now, going back, so that's an odd one in the sequence, because the previous one is actually very easy to read. Now this one goes back to the complex books again. And I call this a technical description of mediumship part 2. And this is really technical. So I don't adventure reading this without actually reading at least a little bit of, we're talking about Spirit's book, reading about the Gospel according to Spiritism, So read it, but understanding that this is a very complex essay about a mediumship. And he describes a lot of physics about this, for example, mental currents, how we connect our minds through this current, which we cannot detect by our instruments on Earth, but it's called mental current, and we can influence each other's mind without really talking to each other, and he talks about that. Describes psychophony from a spiritual view, like the psychoscope, which is a machine they use to looking through your very, very deep thoughts from previous incarnations, so they know exactly what you have been doing many years ago and things like this. And clairvoyance, mediumistic meetings, psychometry, which is understanding the history of an objection. This is very nice. They can actually go by an object and tell the history of it, for example. And he explains how does that happen, because there's every time that object is being held or in the possession of someone, it kind of absorbs a little bit of the history of that person, the energy of that person, and you can actually tap onto that object. Well, they can do it, we can do it, and tell exactly where was that object once in the history. It was in a castle or someone owned it, who was the person, and they can actually go in a window in time based on that. So he go in the museum, and in the museum he can actually tell the history of each one of It's kind of an amazing story, but. And action and reaction, so he's back to the umbrals, and he describes the umbral again and the abysms. It's really like, it's an interesting book. It describes a place called the Peace Mansion, which is by the instructor Druso, which is located in the umbral. So we think the umbral is like this dump, where it's like, you go there and you just be like in this dirty place. No, actually there's a lot of work happening there, is that a lot of people can't see it, because especially the spirits that are in the umbral, their vision's totally clogged. So they can't see that there's like a very good spirit just beside him saying, hey, come. They're completely oblivious to that. And this book really talks about that too. And there's multiple examples of the law of cause and effect. Maternal love and collective rescues. There's a description of an airplane crash, and how spiritually, how is that handled, basically, how they can rescue all the spirits at the same time. And requests for medical conditions to clear out long debts. And this is an area that I like a lot, because after reading so much, I've started to realize that whenever we try to think that a disease as a problem that will take our life. And Luiz presents here that actually diseases are the cure. And very often we ask for them. So we can, through living that experience, we can cleanse ourselves from energies that we acquired through many, many incarnations of mistakes, for example. That is a completely new view of diseases. Some people come and say, I want to have a cancer that will lose my leg. I want to do it because I use my leg for this, that for like 20 generations here on Earth. And I think at this point, the only way I can cope with that is that if I go through this. I ask myself for it to happen with me. If it's approved, then that's what's going to happen. And not to say they were going to say, oh, no, okay, I'm not doing anything about it, just take my life, I want to suffer. No, we have to fight it. But with the understanding that a lot of these things are happening for a reason. And that's what he talks about in action and reaction. So God is perfect. Remember that. Mechanism mediumship is a technical description of mediumship part 3. So this one is really the most advanced level book of André Luiz of all of them. So it really just talks about photon, waves, radiation, mental matter, talks about the mental fluidic currents and things like this. So it's a very interesting book, by the way. Sex and Destiny. Another one that you can actually probably start reading from this one. It kind of gets off the sequence of complexity. It's a nice book. Talks about sex, which is a topic that a lot of us have trouble even saying that word, because we were taught for many years that that's a bad word and that's a sin, and if we say that, we go to hell kind of thing. So it gives a total new perspective to that, and how this is actually one of the most amazing opportunities that we have to generate life, to bring good energies to your kid and to you. There's a lot about it. I don't have time to go through every detail, but if you want to have a total new understanding of that topic, this is really a good place to start. And of course, there's consequences too. There's like the misuse and abuse of sex too. There's both ways. One which is the enlightening way, and the other one which is the not so enlightening way. And he describes the consequences of abusing that capability and what happens if you do that. So you learn a lot about it in a very realistic way by giving examples. He always gives examples of everything. Right? This Obsession is just a manual for Spiritist meetings. So this is really not a novel. There's no point for you really going through this unless you really want to start working and learning about mediumship. Right? And Life Goes On is really like a nice novel about Evelina and Ernesto, and talks about challenges of family. This is another book that you could probably start reading from this one if you want. This is a very nice love story, family ties again, how families are interconnected. There is a lot of things like betrayals and people cheating each other, but all in the context of learning about family relationships. So it's very interesting. So to finalize, André Luiz is really a messenger, because he gives us the first complete detailed description of the spiritual world and the spiritual life and how you work and what you do when you go there. Like, this is really the first very detailed description. We had like spots of information coming from different sources, giving us a glimpse, I would say, of what happens. But he's like, I'm here and I'm doing this. And it's really interesting to see it that way. He's a teacher after he goes through his own process of self-renewal and getting rid of his old self. He starts to bring some of the most novel and intriguing concepts in Spiritism and science. Because he talks about some of the concepts in science that are being proved today, for example. One, for example, the pineal gland, there's a lot of research on it nowadays. We still don't know a lot about it, but he brought them some concepts that are being tested today in regular science. Not sure how long it's going to take it or when it's going to happen, but at some point we'll probably start to realize that there's a lot there that we don't know, and we need to connect with Spiritism and spirituality in general. He teaches us using his own experience what we need to do to evolve, and that's what I like about André Luiz a lot. A friend, because he's always humble, he's always very simple, he's always very friendly, and any of the books that you start, you clearly see that. He describes things in first person, and he uses a very straightforward language, and he's very close to us in his narrative, so that's good. And he describes everything as someone who's just trying to help us. And you can see that too. Never putting himself above us, always on our side. So this is really André Luiz for us. So I think we do have a couple minutes for
we do have some minutes
questions.
for questions. If anyone have any questions for Marco, we can go through that right now.
Yeah. Or we can have lunch. Let's go.
Have a question there.
Yes.
From your point of view,
Yeah.
for a person that is starting to learn about spiritism,
Yes.
which collection do you suggest? André Luiz books or Emmanuel books?
That's a good question. Emmanuel, the novels from Emmanuel. So Emmanuel has two sets of collections, I would say. So the novels are amazing books. It's really like anyone could read. You don't need any special, like you don't need any, you basically just go and read it. That we're talking about is like 2,000 years ago. We're talking, like the sequence from that book. So if you want to go into that, that's amazing. You can start from that point. Now, the other books from Emmanuel, which are, some of them are quite technical. For example, I don't know if all of them are translated. For example, Brasil, Pátria do Evangelho, for example. It's a historical view, but it may be a little bit more complex. But it's a historical view of things,
But
right?
it's not Emmanuel. Brasil, Coração do Mundo, Pátria do Evangelho, não é?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's not Emmanuel. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah. So religion. Yeah, that's right. Religion of the spirits, right? So if you want to go through that, then it's a little bit more complex. Not as easy to read as the novels, but André Luiz is a little bit different because André Luiz, he's really talking in a first person on what he's actually doing and describing details of what's around him. So it's a little bit more targeted to telling us what's happening in the spiritual world. Emmanuel is always more like broad thinking, like major concept descriptions, historical events, which are all good. I mean, I would tell you like read them all, right? But if you want to start reading, so I would say start reading by the Spirits book, which you learn like basic question and answer type of approach to things, and you can get the basic concepts. The Gospel will give you another layer of concepts on top of the Spirits book, and then from that point, you probably can read any of those books, and you'll be totally fine, right? Just if you go through the sequence is always better. If avoid the more technical, challenging ones, because those are more very complex. But in Emmanuel, I think the novels from Emmanuel are very good, and you certainly enjoy them. Yeah.
Any other question? All right, thank you so much, Marcos. And so let's do our final prayer, and then I come back and give you a few announcements and how we're gonna do the lunch. So I invite Teresa to do the final prayer, and then I come back.
So let us all close our eyes and relax our bodies. Let's all connect our mind and our heart with God, our Creator, with the Jesus, our Master, and with all the good spirits and mentors that are here present at TSS. And let's thank for one more time being here together, incarnated and discarnated, to learn a little bit more from this beautiful lecture that we just had. We also like to thank Luiz and Chico Xavier for this beautiful collection of books that they brought to us as a gift to help us to learn, to help us to grow, to help us with our inner transformation. Let's all receive the good fluids, the positive energy that's here. So today when we leave here, we all can live a little bit more in peace, feeling the love, feeling all this fraternal energy that we have received here today. So be it.
All right, just a quick announcement. This week we are starting back our studies. So we are done with the book study that we did during the summer for the works of the Life Eternal. So we are back Joy studies on Wednesday. We're gonna do the Gospel according to Spiritism. It is 1 hour and a half. You're studying the Gospel according to Spiritism, and what we're gonna do is not bring only the Gospel, but all the books from Spiritism that we can learn a little bit more. And as you said, Emmanuel will be one of the sources for us to learn. On the Thursday, they will resume the study of the Spirit's book and Heaven and Hell. It also starting at 7 p.m. through until 8:30. And then we also have our fraternal meetings every Wednesday and Thursdays, start at 5:30. If you want to talk about anything that you have going through and want a little bit of what Spiritism can teach us from that situation, we are here to help. And we just ask you guys to call or to send an email to us that we can arrange that. We have our gospel at home, so if anyone is starting a gospel at home and want to help to do that, we have a team here that can go to your house and get it started. Okay, about the lecture today, we do have not all, but almost every single book that Marco talked today. So if you want to buy one of those books, all in English, we have that in English here. It's available in our book sales. So today is our lunch and learn. So now we're gonna organize the room to be our lunch. The lunch is the way that we help Toronto Spirit Society to pay our bills, the rent, the computers, everything that we have here. There is a cost, and this is the way that we do it. We ask a donation of $15. That includes the lunch and a drink. So everybody's invited to stay. And there's no passes today. There's the only Sunday that we don't passes today because the way that the house is set up and all the food, etc. We choose to not do the passes today. Okay, so we're gonna be here. Marco, I believe you will stay for the lunch. So if you have any question, you can also take some time, have lunch with him, and talk a little bit more. All right. Thank everyone who's watching us through the internet, and hope to see you guys again.